screen dance practice. I hope that by this amplification, screen dance, it may be seen has increased the availability of screen dance, making it more accessible to a wider audience base. And this is not the first time that scholars have tried to explain the difference between what I am referring to as screen dance and screened dance. Vera Malatic made the argument in the Dance Research Journal of winter 1987-88, quote, realizing that a distinction must finally be made between video dance and videotaped dance, end quote. Malatic goes on to describe video dance as, quote, a blending of structural and perceptual elements intrinsic to dance and the media, end quote, whereas videotape dance is shot as a record in place of the dance score. As we have moved away from analog video recording to a digital screen, I hope that the move from video dance to screen dance can also be made from videotaped dance to screened dance. In essence, I would say that screen dance is made for the screen, and if you take that screen away, the work would no longer remain. Screened dance, on the other hand, is work that has migrated to screen space because of a closure of theatres and dance settings, and although currently prolific, can easily return to a live space. To further pass the distinction between screen dance and screened dance, I would like to highlight the first show on Sadler's Wells' digital stage. Ballet Boys Deluxe launched on Friday the 27th of March 2020 in celebration of World Theatre Day. The digital stage gave a platform for Sadler's Wells to stream recordings of a variety of work available for a 7-day period. I'm singling out this show in particular as it involves work of screen dance and screened dance. The first work in the trilogy was a screen dance work by Sarah Golding. The intro. The 6 boys in white boiler suits take over a black box space, vying for attention from each other and the audience. Billed as a short dance film, it is clear that artistic directors Michael Nunn and William Trevitt have separated it from the 2 works that follow. Ripple by Ji Jin and Bradley 4.18 by Maxine Doyle Bradley are filmed versions of the stage work, and by my suggestion, versions of screened dance. By placing these works next to each other, it is easier to see the distinction that I am making between choreography made explicitly for the screen and work that was intended for the live stage that through necessity has migrated to screen space. Alongside my suggestion for an altered naming convention, I would also like to consider how we might move the practice of screen dance forward through the inclusion of interactivity. Interactive video is often described in relation to a choose-your-own-adventure book, where the reader is able to make narrative choices by turning to different pages at key points in the plot. Similarly, interactive video allows viewers to make choices at key points in the work, which send them down different branches, which in turn affects the story arc. It is widely believed that the first work of interactive video was Lynn Hirschman's Lorna in 1984. Developed out of a frustration with video as, quote, a one-sided discourse like a trick mirror that absorbs instead of reflects, end quote, the work encourages the viewer to make surrogate decisions for the titular Lorna through a branching design of the video disc, leading through to multiple endings, as well as multiple treatments of the video footage, sped up, slowed down, reversed, etc. Hirschman goes on to acutely assert the problems with Lorna, particular to the drawbacks of the available technology in the mid-1980s. She suggests, quote, Lorna is generally inaccessible. It was pressed in a limited edition of 25, of which only 14 now exist. It is only occasionally installed in galleries or museums. Creating a truly interactive work demands that it exists on a mass scale, available and accessible to many people, end quote. In the near 40 years since Lorna was first pressed onto disc, technology has taken strides forwards in how interactive video is produced and performed, particularly with the development of digital technologies. These developments have turned the inaccessible small-scale production into a mass market for anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection. The narrative-led video game is a clear form of interactive video. So named because of video clips that link the stages of gameplay, narrative-led video games have become a staple of entertainment and have been further developed through to game streaming services and platforms. They have developed beyond story mode to a free play, where the player is able to make their own decisions in the world that their animated self or avatar inhabits. This development from a live film used to link sections to a fully realized CGI world has enabled many more branches to emerge within a story, since it takes less time and less space to digitally render a character. Taking into account the development of video games and how this has informed the establishment of interactive video through streaming services and multimedia transferable software, it is possible to see how by building on clear user navigation, it may play a part in the interactive art and the possibilities of interactive screen dance. The way that these narrative style games were marketed, sold, and mass produced into the home differentiates them from the interactive video art, which relied on installation in galleries or museums. As video games accelerated with their availability in the home and on personal and mobile gaming devices, I would suggest that there will be a wider audience for interactive videos as these works become more mobile friendly and more easily available, as Hirschman asserted when discussing the inaccessibility of Lorna. Interactive video has become as sophisticated as many other forms of digital entertainment, but is perhaps not as readily available as its video game counterparts. Having borrowed from other forms of interactive entertainment that developed in parallel to screen dance and video art in order to better explain the overall landscape of current interactive video, it is my assertion that this may come to the fore as audience members are able to create their own narratives, and digital performance then allows for a more individual experience of the work. To move on to discussing Black Mirror Bandersnatch from 2018 is a mainstream example of interactive video. It was an interactive episode of a previously successful series available on the streaming platform Netflix. Black Mirror is a dystopian science fiction anthology series, and Bandersnatch follows Stefan Butler as he creates a video game based on a choose-your-own adventure book of the same name. The narrative of the work matches and borrows aspects of the branching pathways and choices available to players of the fictional game, as well as audience members as they interact with the episode. As audience members interact, their choices can pivot the arc of the narrative, which I will be referring to as pivot points, or they may lead to an out, which is one of many multiple endings which may lengthen or shorten the runtime. An out is the point at which an audience member can exit the interactive video, similar to the way that you might end a video game by completing the story, whereas narrative pivot points, often presented as an AB or ABC choice via on-screen text, are more reminiscent of reaching a save point in a video game, or your avatar being defeated and having to go back to the beginning of the section. In Bandersnatch, the pivot points can lead to 5 possible endings, with some pivot points also working as outs. Any choice made, which could be described as a mistake, such as a choice which results in the death of a character, will allow you to either go to the end of the story or go back to the point of your last choice in order to amend your selection. These earlier choices, which are more like the save points, allow audiences the chance to make mistakes as a way of learning how the interactive video operates. I previously suggested that these different outs could lengthen or shorten the runtime, and this is true of Bandersnatch. At its shortest, it is reported to be around 40 minutes, whereas the average runtime is around 90 minutes, and various reports have said that the longest can be in excess of 2 hours. This example of interactive video pushes the boundaries of how audience members might interact with entertainment and shows how it straddles the narrative built by video games, as audience members can see the narrative unfolding and can more clearly understand how their choices are affecting it. We could therefore borrow from this in terms of the possibility it lays out. We can look to the ideas around interactive video and apply those to screen dance in order to push the boundaries of how audience members interact with choreography. I have looked at pivot points and outs as techniques for controlling the narrative arc of the work, although these could also be employed in terms of a choreographic theme or movement vocabulary. Further to these specific techniques, it might be possible for interactive screen dance to be movement or thematically driven. In order to translate a plot-driven work into a movement-driven style, I would argue that we need to look at the way that audience members are presented with a choice. In current interactive video, you're presented with your AB or ABC choice as a word or short sentence which appears on the screen, which you can then highlight and select. For movement, however, this text-based choice system would not as easily translate, movement descriptions likely being too long. To combat this, one suggestion may be the inclusion of GIFs at these choice points. I would like to suggest the use of GIF as an extension of the ideas of aesthetic glitch offered by Peter Krapp. Although Krapp does not speak directly about GIFs, he does suggest that, quote, aesthetic expressions in digital culture seek to be recognized as entirely new and inheriting the legitimacy of any serious art that preceded it, end quote, and goes on to assert that, quote, since cut and montage and linear prediction codes, cinema and new media have revolutionized our sense of time and space, end quote. From this, I would suggest that a GIF could be seen as a visual representation of a digital glitch, while also actively playing with an audience member's sense of time and space. By sectioning off the screen and showing audience members short repeating sections of movement that they will see after making their choice, this may go some way to translating current interactive video practices into a screen dance space. Regrettably, I was unable to consider Reunited by Ellie and Dance as part of my full paper, as it was released after it was written. But this work of interactive screen dance has also gone some way to solving this text-based versus GIF issue when presenting a choice by incorporating a mixture of text and visuals into the treatment of the pivot points in order to move the work forward. At the start of this presentation, I was interested in how we might be able to differentiate between screen dance and screened dance practice in relation to the lockdown imposed by COVID-19. I suggested that now might be the time to implement interactive video practice into the screen dance discussion, as audiences are currently more used to streaming videos and dance into their homes. I also suggested that it might be possible that video games gained popularity as they were placed directly into people's homes, whereas this development has been slower in terms of interactive video. The final section identified the use of interactivity and looked to link interactivity to the practice of screen dance. COVID-19 has affected dance in a myriad of ways. However, as more people are getting used to screened dance, this may have a positive effect on screen dance practice. Interactive video being just one of the ways of bringing screen dance further out of the gallery. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandhya.
Hi, I'm Sandhya. I live in Seattle. My paper for this session is titled Extended Beings, Screen Dance as a Reflective and Interrogative Tool During COVID-19. This is really a personal perspective on teaching my elementary school children when schools closed. And I'm going to talk really about our engagement with climate change, storytelling for reflexive learning, and using really basic screen dance tools to bring in a deeper focus and understanding to childhood pedagogy. What I observed with my children when they interacted with the screen, either as a laptop, iPad, or just the Apple iPhone, the videos that they took, the images and the editing, all of these gave them a longer process of learning. And this whole thing could be used as a pedagogical tool to explore complex relationships between systems and to develop critical ways for young children to engage with difficult topics such as the environment, what do we do, what is happening to the earth, and a world that they will be growing into. So during the remote learning months, what we did was we looked at several children's books that talked about climate change, sustainability, environment. And we also decided to use dance movements to interrogate what we learned. My background is in Bharatanatyam. I am a Bharatanatyam teacher, and my younger child, who is 5 years old, now 6, is learning. And so she is, I mean, of course, being young children, they really are just starting to learn. So, you know, the other thing that we used for all our discussions was we spent a year in India as a family, and we traveled the whole of India. We went into national parks. We interacted with the tribal people, as well as waited for hours to be able to see a tiger. So some of these experiences sort of informed this whole narrative and the time that we spent exploring this whole process. So I'm going to try to share a couple of pictures. And what you see in the first picture is my younger daughter embodying a dolphin. They love dolphins, as most children do. And what she is showing is a dolphin swimming and getting caught in plastic. As she was just embodying that, it seemed to her that she was this one dolphin, swimming through a giant ocean, being caught up in a plastic. But as she looked at the video later, and then she tried to improvise her movements and then remade her videos, and then she took lots of images and stitched them together, what she started thinking about were, this is not one dolphin, this is many dolphins. What if there are more than one dolphin? What if it's a mom and a baby dolphin? What if the baby dolphin is caught and the mom is trying to free the dolphin? So it started going in two different directions. One was as a cross-species empathy, as a human being trying to ask this question of what do we do when we see a wild animal or any animal in distress? And then secondly, we explored this question of becoming animal. What do we do if we, are the dolphin? How would we feel if we are trapped in it? It was really an interesting exploration. Again, when she did the tiger in the red dress, the tiger, this is a sort of the little line of stones is the human-animal conflict zone, which is very common in Asia. And the tiger is beyond the boundary to begin with, and then comes in, grabs a lamb, a sheep, or something from a farmer. And in this process, the farmer, who may not have a lot of resources, finally resorts to killing the tiger. So the two things that came out of this kind of exploration that I noticed was how they negotiated time. And instead of a very linear progression of how they looked at things, it was more like, instead of just saying, oh, here's the dolphin, it is swimming, it is coming in contact with plastic waste and trying to then extricate itself from it. Instead, they were able to go back and forth, watching the different videos and in the whole editing process, trying to investigate, well, what if it was one time point before or after? What if it was more than one dolphin? How would the different dolphins see it? Maybe the first dolphin moved away and didn't really see it. Maybe the mom didn't notice the baby caught first, and then she had to come back around. So there was a lot of this negotiation of time. And also they started to sort of really, I felt that they were breaking the boundaries of the self, going in from a very anthropogenic perspective, and then starting to explore the space between the human and animal world, so to say. The other thing was navigating this, or bringing in sort of a multi-centered gaze, where many places that they had visited, even though we were just performing, we were just staying at home, and everything was happening at home, the imagination and the memories of what they had experienced before gathered at the location of this dance and reformed and reframed their identities, giving them multiple layers of meaning as they sort of negotiated this boundary between the real and the virtual. For me, coming from the Bharatanatyam world, this was very fascinating and interesting, because I was used to teaching from being rooted in your body, rooted inside yourself, the inner environment and the outer environment, and the whole somatic experience. But what I was seeing from my children was they were learning by their constant interaction and with a virtual environment, which was allowing them to reimagine scenarios and locations in multiple ways, and also allowing them to learn what a complex system could be, what could the interactions be between these various aspects of a system. So what you see on the right side is my 10-year-old trying to trace out all the connections that she saw, starting from just that iPhone and what are the different features she explored, what did dance mean, what happened when she tried to take photos and videos of her sister and edited them. And then what is happening with the tiger, what happens with the farmer trying to kill the tiger, and then the dolphins. And we also had a vulture experiment. So I felt that even though they are children, just using this really basic screen dance tools was offering them a sort of a dual space of engaging with both their bodies and extending their experience into the screen, making for learning in when all of us are trying to learn and exchange through this virtual mode. They were able to communicate and also create a different identity and self for themselves, and also bring in all their feelings and emotions and explore it through this process. So even though this is not a perfect example of Paul Milgram's augmented virtuality, I felt like this little COVID project that we did at home was a space where the real augments the virtual. And what we need to do if we were to use this moving forward as a pedagogical tool would be to develop appropriate scaffolding materials for children to explore the mind-body complex and to learn the real differences and the space between the real and the virtual. This is really the essence of what I wrote in the paper. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. All right, we now have a group who will be presenting all together.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present our work today. Thank you to the organizers, Harmony and Alexandra, and everyone here. My name is Marisa Hayes, and I'm speaking to you from Burgundy, France.
I'm Katja Wagin. I'm speaking to you from Berlin, Germany.
I am Elisa Frasson, and I'm speaking to you from Berlin as well.
And I'm Ariadne Miko, and I'm speaking to you from Italy. And sorry, this is Marco, who will be with us in Paper Spirit. He's our collaborator.
This contribution proposes a forum of questions in order to reflect on the reception, creation, and distribution of dance media online during the global pandemic. It is the result of a collaborative initiative undertaken by a group of 5 interdisciplinary dance and film scholars and artists based in Europe, specifically France, Germany, Greece, and Italy. We met weekly on Zoom throughout the summer of 2020 to exchange ideas, concerns, and projects related to choreography and screens during lockdown.
Some of us already knew each other while others had never met. Recognizing our diverse background, approaches, and geographic location as a strength or forum of question does not assume that there is any one established definition of screen dance or experience of the pandemic. Instead, it seeks to build upon a shared interest in screen dance to pose questions that extend to many types of dance media and screen experiences that arose and continue to arise within the context of the global pandemic.
The decision to use questions as a structure for this contribution was key. Questions inspire autonomous reflection and do not seek to impose a single response. They provide a wide girth for different points of view and considerations of complex issues, which vary according to many factors. Currently, the forum of questions is structured in large groups according to topics such as education, aesthetics, narratives, society, labor, economy, and politics.
They predominantly cover the time span that dates from the first lockdown in Europe through the second pandemic wave, approximately March 2020, October 2020. It is our hope that these questions will serve as a tool to generate open and diverse perspectives on the experience of screen dance and dance media in the present time and in the future. We will now take a moment to share an animated word cloud with you that presents the basic key points in our research. Sorry. We're now going to share a selection from approximately 80 questions from our forthcoming publication.
We begin with 3 introductory questions that seek to underscore the relevance of established dialogues in the screen dance community to further enhance discussions of screen-based work at the present time.
To what extent can we speak of a community born from the screen?
What happens when the codes of live arts are introduced to online space?
And have the limits of screen dance been reached 10 years after the claim that screen dance has not yet been invented?
And now for some specific questions that were generated as a result of the pandemic. What happens to an isolated body viewing an image of a body or bodies?
How can we cultivate kinesthetic empathy through performing agents on screen?
How does the blurring of online-offline boundaries affect our perception of a work of art, in this case, screen dance?
Does a work for screen age more quickly than one on stage?
Has our understanding of screen dance changed? Has it perhaps become more precise or open? And does the quantity of dance media online pose a threat to the specificity of screen dance?
How do Zoom and other online platforms build on and/or depart from dance pedagogy traditional focus on physical contact and oral transmission?
Is there an aesthetics of intimacy that emerged during the pandemic via the sharing of personal home spaces online, self-representation and framing options?
What new political and social dimensions does online space acquire during a time of quarantines and curfews?
Is the pandemic a theme, a production context, or both?
Has the pandemic pushed the notion of precarity and hyperproductivity to its limit?
What changes have affected the creative process, both in the pre-production and during the production of screen dance?
How do recently created works of screen dance contribute to political dialogues regarding the pandemic and international affairs?
These questions have been produced to generate active viewing and reflection. We would like to pause briefly for the word cloud so that we can leave you before we leave you with one further question.
In conclusion,
Is there
such a thing
as a pandemic gaze?
thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. If we don't get many questions from the audience, we have some very productive questions from you all. Just a reminder, if you do have questions during the presentations, feel free to put them in the chat, and we also will have the formal Q&A afterwards. Dara.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Dara Milovanovic, and I am doing this presentation from Limassol, Cyprus, known as the Island of Love in marketing for the Brits. And I would like to just thank Harmony and Alex for all the amazing work you've done. I've managed to see most of the panels except for the ones that were 3 a.m. for me. And I've really enjoyed seeing them. So I hope that I can contribute in some way. So I'm just going to do a quick screen share, if you don't mind, so you can see less of my face because I'm sick of seeing my face on Zoom. And okay, so what I'm looking at, so this is a presentation that's obviously just a small portion of the paper that will be in the journal, and therefore it does not go into depth, but just posit some of the ideas of what I was concerned with. So it starts with that as lockdown hit, on March 18th of 2020, so exactly a year ago, my husband, who is also a dancer, and I took a Graham class on our living room floor in Cyprus, which was streamed on Instagram by the dancers of the Martha Graham Dance Company. We, like dance nerds that we are, wore a Graham t-shirt and positioned ourselves on the floor to start with the bounces and breathings. We filmed ourselves doing turns around the back, having to consistently adjust our positions to avoid hitting each other and the persistent cat, who you can see there stuck on my face. We posted these videos on Instagram, and then the Graham Dance Company reposted it, which gave us giddy joys as we felt recognized and seen in our geographically remote positions in comparison to the US. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, as you all know, commanded lockdowns across the majority of the world, bringing various sectors of the professional dance world to a sudden halt. In Cyprus, where I live and work, a very strict lockdown was imposed. At this time, impromptu online dance classes began to appear in a variety of dance genres by world-famous dancers and dance companies. I was delighted to dance for some of the major dance companies such as ABT, New York City Ballet, the Graham Company, the Akram Khan Dance Company, and Gaga People, to name a few, began to offer free online classes on various digital platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Sometimes I took class, at other times I just watched classes, trying to make sense of the new dance presence in the online world. As a popular dance scholar with a particular interest in screen dance, I'm used to watching dance online and on screen. But the COVID-19 pandemic shifted what kind of dance exists online and how it is distributed and consumed. In this presentation, I seek to explore two junctures: the co-option implication of popular screen dance aesthetics by concert dance forms, namely ballet and contemporary dance, and the post-colonial position of the online classes from the global north within living rooms and bedrooms across the world. Prompted by the 2018 edition of Dance Studies Association's Conversations Across the Field of Dance Studies on how popular dance is often the innovative site where so many of our everyday relationships with local, national, global politics gain visibility, and how the practice of corporeal politics acts as a mode of resilience, I seek to analyze the political effect of online ballet and contemporary dance classes during the 2020 lockdown. I purposefully focus on internet-based classes in ballet and contemporary dance, as this trend seems specific to pandemic culture, as opposed to social and popular dance, which has a strong presence in the media and digital landscapes. After many years of not taking ballet classes, I had chosen to do a ballet bar during the lockdown, often late at night in my pajamas. I would hide in our bedroom, hold onto the moving office chairs, my makeshift bar, and mostly try to psychologically reconcile with the images of stunning dancers on screen and my fast diminishing turnout. I tried a variety of classes and observed some trends. The ballet classes offered online varied in style, aimed at different audiences, and adjusted to the aesthetics and demands of social media, and thus popular dance. For example, Adam Borland of Orlando Ballet offered classes on Facebook that used social media catchphrases such as Monday Motivation Ballet and Sunday Fun Day Ballet. Isabella Boston and James Whiteside from ABT employed multiple themes for their classes, including Star Wars, that Isabella dressed as Princess Leia, vintage ballet looks, and Harry Potter, making their classes fun and relatable. Online dance classes have increased popularity of ballet and contemporary dance and brought them into the mainstream popular culture. Ballet exists on the periphery for majority of the people who are more likely to be exposed to 15 to 60-second dances on TikTok and dances in music videos rather than full-length ballet at large opera houses. Isabella Boston Instagram post showing a video of herself and James Whiteside doing a section of the ballet bar in her kitchen, again on March 18th of 2020, raised social media reach. She writes, "Holy cow, over 15,000 of you tuned into the Cindy's ballet class just now. That's almost 4 times the capacity of our largest theater, the Met Opera House. Just think what we could accomplish together. Cindy and I," this is what they call themselves, "will continue to give live IG ballet classes. The next time we will be asking for a totally voluntary donation that will give straight to the dancers' emergency fund." Without going into too much detail, the numbers of views for other dance classes were also large, ranging from 19,000 views on a Graham class on YouTube by the dance company to Tamara Rojo's class for an English National Ballet, which had almost 200,000 views. As I have already mentioned, I live and work in Cyprus, which is a small sovereign island in the Mediterranean. So as a contemporary dancer who was trained in the UK and the US, I was allowed a unique vantage point to consider the online dance classes during the pandemic, as ordinarily, Cypriot dancers do not have access to taking classes locally. Cyprus is politically and economically European, yet it remains on the periphery of the Western world geographically. As a post-colonial country, following Ottoman and British colonial rule and the ethnic divide of the 1974 Turkish invasion, Cyprus exhibits a strong pull to Western trends and development, yet it keenly aims to hold on to traditions. As prominent Cypriot scholar Zelia Georgiou explains, defining Cyprus as simply post-colonial fails to acknowledge its complexity as she states. By addressing colonialism as a historical phenomenon and defining itself as a critical meta-discourse, it can be argued that post-colonialism denies both existing colonialism and its own discourse implications in current webs of knowledge and power. Western understanding of post-colonialism does not necessarily apply to the Cypriot model, which Georgiou argues continues to privilege, quote, the Western subject as the subject of reflexivity and atonement. As an ethnically divided country, Cyprus exhibits a strong society to its national self. What is clearly evident in Cyprus and its dance scene is that what has been essential to the machine of colonialism had been the hinge between Western imperialism and local internal colonialism. For contemporary dance practices, this means that most local dancers and choreographers practice Western styles of dance, specifically release, most popular, Graham and Cunningham, with postmodern compositional practices and largely ignore traditional dance and music. Thus, ability to take classes from the largely recognized Western dance centers appeal to the marginalized dance practitioners in Cyprus. The pandemic has allowed a wider cast net for dance training and access for particular dance forms. Harmony Bench, and this is quite nerve-wracking to quote her right in front of her, alludes to the importance of digital dance to ensure a more democratic access to dance, as she states. Digital media at the forefront of my own investigation reach farther and wider than the festivals and metropolitan theaters to which European dance artists might tour their stage-based productions. Furthermore, these media bring all possible dance forms into the flattening space of the computer screen, blurring distinctions among movement practices and communities and disarticulating them from their histories, and cultural situations, end quote. Online dance classes may have provided an access to training and challenged the privileges of geography, economics, and access. However, they still may exclude individuals with the disadvantages of not having personal space to take class in, leisure time, or even internet access. Set against the political control of the lockdown and the loss of personal freedom in the name of public safety, the classes provided a new sense of freedom and virtual democracy by extending their potential reach into geographically peripheral places such as Cyprus, beyond major metropolitan cities that house well-established dance companies. The availability of online dance classes seems to represent a vastly Western experience of offering instruction in white, concert dance forms appealing to a marginalized demographic seeking Western experiences and approval. Although Harmony Bench critiques Ramsey Burt's romanticized vision of contemporary dance practice in Europe, she still presumes that Europe as a concept provides equal access to dance training and producing. Geographical definition of Europe is vastly different to its political one, which is amplified for dance, with countries in Western and Central Europe holding a monopoly on contemporary dance in terms of training and choreographic opportunities. Although ballet training is widely available and has been in ex-Soviet countries, as well as those adjacent to the communist phenomenon, more peripheral countries, for example, Cyprus, Malta, and Iceland, have gained access to ballet and contemporary training in the late second half of the 20th century. The phenomenon of online classes may be particularly exciting for dancers in geographically remote places who ordinarily do not have access to training with New York or London-based artists. And my mention of these two cities is purposeful, as they're often seen as the epitome of dance training and performing. Therefore, even people within the US, UK, and Europe who engage in dance practice in remote, rural places would possibly have the same experience as someone living on an island in the Mediterranean. The post-colonial pull towards the Western trends makes activities from these regions additionally exciting for Cypriot artists. By shifting to digital spaces, ballet and contemporary dance allowed people to learn dances in the same way as many social and popular dance forms that appear in mainstream media. Melissa Blanco Borelli defines the relationship between popular dance and its spectators, consumers' ability to learn to perform these dances, as she writes, for it is through the ubiquitous availability of such mediated performances that dance on screen becomes corporeal and tangible. This is an idea that has been transferred to the possibility of learning ballet and contemporary dance during the 2020 pandemic. Free online dance classes disrupt the idea of who has the privilege to train. While streaming a class cannot replace the experience of studio class with a teacher providing feedback and corrections, it does allow dancers with experience to continue to engage in daily practice. Some dancers offered instructions for beginners, allowing access to a larger dance community. Bench argues that, quote, mobilized dancing bodies reclaim and choreograph terrains that ought to exclude them, close quote. Thus, by engaging with the online dance present during the pandemic, the dance model may have been altered to a more democratic and inclusive space. Ideally, online dance classes provide universal access to dance training, but I wonder if someone without training and background in ballet, Graham, or Cunningham could safely and effectively follow class, therefore continuing disparity in dance training. As dancers were removed from their natural habit of dance studios and stages, a new digital community emerged with the presence of online dance classes that invited participation. Online dance classes require involvement and engagement, creating a participatory type of comment. As Bench argues, quote, by learning a dance, one corporeally manifests belonging to a social group, even if that group is constituted in online spaces or through shared media use rather through physical proximity, close quote. Therefore, dancers enjoying these classes were united by their experience of taking classes during this given time riddled with similar concerns and fears. Engaging with online dance classes through physical participation, commentary, and visual images, dancers negotiate and contest their belonging to a community. Learning to dance as a process of belonging provided the participants with the optimistic opportunity to belong to a world unified by dance rather than one clearly divided by politics and economics. Participation of dancers in online dance classes spreads the dance forms across geographical, pandemic, and economic boundaries, creating a corporeal common. However, raises alarming issues about colonization through globalization and promotion of Western dance forms, which may ignore cultural specificities of remote, peripheral, or marginalized places. Dancers engaging in online dance classes, improvisations, choreographic experiments during the pandemic have a kinesthetic experience of the teacher and viewer, This experience highlights corporeality and subjectivity of dancers whose physical identities are articulated by the act of dancing, and form a reactive and reactionary entities that are political and able to contest boundaries of control. As dancing bodies united across screen, engage in kinesthetic experience, they form a collective physical action and powerful experience of community in a world halted and divided by the pandemic. Using, again, Bench's argument that participatory commons, quote, enable contemporary discourse in which the commons signal open access, anti-capitalism, and radical democracy, offers the possibility to look at the online dance presence during the pandemic as revolutionary in terms of economics and as an alternative to neoliberal financial ideology that defines economics of the 21st century Western countries, as it challenges formal economics of institutions and geographic boundaries. The new geographic and economic proposal to dance democracy that the online dance classes during the COVID-19 pandemic have introduced will reorganize dance practices and create new, complex social relations that challenge the arts hierarchy. The very presence of dancers online serves as an act of resistance and their belief in the possibility of instigating change. Dance artists of various backgrounds and experiences mobilized with the act of moving, teaching, dancing to resist the stillness of the lockdown forced onto the professional dance world ended up challenging politics and economics of formal dance training, institutions, and access. Responding to their own need to practice their art, as well as the need to provide a social contribution, dance artists offering classes online became autonomous producers of their art and thus asserted their independence. Online dance classes challenged the idea of institutions, formal training, and hierarchy of master and teacher. Artists disturbed class distinctions and arbitrary divisions between concert and popular dance. And by doing so, professional artists, by well-established companies, bypassed and sponsored institutions and created an anti-capitalist approach to dance from their living rooms and kitchens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, to finish us off, Kate and Tria.
Thank you so much. We wanted to take a moment to thank Harmony and Alex for organizing. The title of our article is Movement as Medicine and Screen Dance's Survivance, Indigenous Reclamation and Innovation During COVID-19. We wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm on. My name is Tria Blue-Wakpa, and I'm an assistant professor at UCLA in the Department of World Arts, Culture, and Dance. And I wrote this paper with my colleague, Dr. Kate Mattingly, who is an assistant professor in the School of Dance at the University of Utah. And UCLA occupies Tongva land. And so it's important for us to acknowledge that this was Tonga land in the past. It also is in the present, and it will be in the future as well. And I think it's useful also to state that there have been critiques around land acknowledgement, and people are pushing for material acts as well. So that includes, maybe making a donation to an Indigenous nation or community center, or building relationships with Native people whose lands you benefit from living and working on every day. So instead of maybe like providing a traditional outline for our paper, first, what we wanted to do is share with you some of the quotes that inspired us in terms of writing our paper. And our paper focuses on the pedagogy of Rulon Tangjin, who is the founder and director of Dancing Earth Creations. And she shared, I wasn't sure if I was alive or not. And the reason why I thought maybe I was I looked down and saw my ribs were moving up and down. I thought that must mean I'm breathing and that must mean I'm alive. And this was an experience that she had when she was very sick with cancer. And for us in our paper, we put it forward because it really challenges Cartesian dualism and shows the ways that the movement of the body is actually creating and providing knowledge. And this is a picture of Rulon. This is outside of Santa Fe, and her company is based both in San Francisco and in Santa Fe.
A second quote that was important to our work comes from Dr. Sunny Taylor, who writes, "We know that environmental destruction aided the conditions that led to this outbreak. The deforestation, rising temperatures, and the loss of habitat all forced species into closer contact with each other, including with our own." And this was important to us. This is an article that's interrogating connections of public health and environmental protection. And it led to our thinking about interdependence and their connection with embodied practices, and specifically the ways that dancing is inextricably linked with health and environmental justice.
And this is another quote by Patrick Wolf, who was a foremost scholar in settler colonialism studies. And he states, "Life is land, or at least land is necessary for life." And of course, you know, for those of people who might be unfamiliar, there have been histories of relocation and displacement of Native peoples from Native lands, and yet Native bodies are connected to Native lands, the regalia, the dance. This is all informed by more than humans, that is air, land, water, non-human animals, and the cosmos. And so this and the feedback from an anonymous reviewer pushed us to consider and more strongly articulate the ways that Indigenous reclamation is also tied to the land back movement, which we'll discuss.
So to connect these three quotes, we found that the work of Tuck and Yang, and this is the article, "Decolonization is Not a Metaphor," brings us to this issue of settler colonialism. And what that means is that settlers want to make a new home on the land, a homemaking that insists on settler sovereignty over all things in their new domain. And we're paying particular attention here to that word homemaking and thinking instead of the concept homecoming. And so what we do in our article is that we focus specifically on the intersections of Tongan's work, screen dance, and homecoming, which we will explain momentarily. And we are really grateful to both Harmony and Alex for the opportunity to share this work in this issue, because we notice that any concept of time that's linear or chronological, and this is visible in words like new or now, contributes to settler colonialism because it's dividing our past from the present and from the future.
So in the paper, we discuss Indigenous movement on screen and off as medicine and liberation. And part of our title for the article, Movement as Medicine, is the name of one of Rulon's online workshops. And these workshops, we argue, generate possibilities for connection, reclamation, and transformation, which we theorize as homecoming. And we explicate in the papers the way that homecoming is, of course, different for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And movement provides Indigenous peoples a way to reconnect with embodied practices and more than human others.
And just to be clear about our research methodology, the project began in April of 2020 when we participated in this online workshop that was called Movement as Medicine, co-taught with Rulon Tongan and Natalie Benali. We then participated in a presentation where Dr. Blue Wakpa invited Rulon to share in conversation with students at UCLA, and this was held online and called Dancing Indigenous Futurities, the Movement of Viral Pandemic Times. We then engaged theoretical discourse that's coming from screen dance studies, Native American and Indigenous studies, and settler colonialism studies. And we also want to respectfully acknowledge that we're building on work about Rulon Tongan stage productions that has been written brilliantly by Jacqueline Shea Murphy and Ananya Chatterjee. And we're also drawing from scholar Michael D'Angeli, who has coined this term dancing sovereignty that's really important about connecting dancing to political practices. And in the remainder of this presentation, we're going to show 4 different parts of our paper and then end with a conclusion.
So the first facet of our paper is dancing as healing. So the movement as medicine workshops offer holistic ways of activating Indigenous epistemologies and recalling Native peoples' responses to previous catastrophes. And this functions a lot as our literature review for the paper. And then an example of movement as medicine is the ghost dance, which occurred in the late 1800s and incorporated movement as medicine, promoted a pan-Indigenous worldview, and resisted settler colonialism and attempts by Euro-Americans to annihilate Indigenous peoples.
Another 2 examples of dancing as healing come from scholar Katja Rissling-Baldi, who's connected embodied practices to methods of rewriting, and rewriting that elucidate how and why ceremonial forms generate solidarity building. And I'm going to return to this notion of rewriting when we discuss screen dance. And then the 4th example is the jingle dress dance, which also originated during a pandemic. And we quote Tara Browner, who has said that one of the most profound elements of the jingle dress dance is its spiritual power, which originates as an energy generated from the sound of the cones. And you're going to see in a moment a picture of what a jingle dress looks like. In our paper, we expand on the notion of entrainment, which is coming from musicology, and it shows the ways that a music's meter transforms us physically, meaning that listening becomes a kind of motor behavior that's transforming our bodies. And this is essential to healing.
This is an image that we also include in our paper. It was created by Acacia Red Elk. That is her depicted in the photograph. She is wearing a jingle dress. As you can see, there's jingles on the sleeves, and then the jingles extend all the way down. It's a long dress. And this was created during the COVID-19 context, and also following the murder of George Floyd. And so it's another example of people viewing the connection between Indigenous movement and Indigenous social movements. And she, Red Elk, conceptualizes the dance as a healing dance, and again, a dance that brings people together for solidarity, including pan-Indigenous solidarity.
The second part of our paper coins this screen dance as survivance. And here we're drawing on cultural theorist Gerald Visner, who's coined the term survivance to indicate a combination of Native survival and resistance. So here we're taking a very capacious definition of screen dance to mean not only the dancing that's created for screens, but also the practices of artists like Rulon that are emphasizing workshops and classes circulating through screens, and additionally, the circulation of images through screens. So the dancing of images through screens, we're theorizing as screen dance. And this is existing historically and currently, and we trace it back to 1894, where you can see in this lower row images from Thomas Edison's what's entitled Buffalo Dance. You can see it in the upper right corner, thinking of the Standing Rock youth who organized activism through social media platforms to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline. And you can also see it in this bottom right image, and this is coming from a 2012 Paul Frank event that was described by scholar Jessica Metcalf as, quote, a racist powwow. And through calling out what had happened in this incident, Paul Frank Industries then sought to acknowledge, apologize, and make amends for it. So we're looking at the circulation of images as a kind of dancing and what potential this holds as a form of organizing and activism.
So this is a third component of our paper, which we label Dancing as Homecoming. And we acknowledge the complexities of Indigenous homecoming during a global pandemic and beyond. And especially because we were thinking about homecoming in relationship to connection with embodied, Indigenous embodied practices. And I think it's important, we assume people know this, but there's a long history of prohibiting Indigenous dance. And that wasn't undone until the 1978 American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And so again, we're mostly looking at this April 2020 online workshop called Movement as Medicine. And this was co-taught, Rulon co-taught this with Natalie Benally through Facebook Live. And it was hosted by the Native Wellness Institute on their Power Hour series. And the workshop incorporated the teachings of the medicine wheel. And the medicine wheel, it has come to stand for a pan-Indigenous practice, and it draws on pan-Indigenous epistemologies and also emphasizes the interdependence of mind, body, heart, and spirit.
And here we're showing a screenshot that's demonstrating the medicine wheel in 4 different directions. And you can see here Rulon Tongan on my left, I'm not sure if it's the same, and Natalie Benally on the right. And what Natalie is describing here are the 4 directions and connecting them to her ancestral homelands and naming the sacred mountains in Dene, in her language. So here we have inextricably linked land, language, and dancing. So we're showing the ways in which a sense of belonging is connected to land through dancing. And this is a picture of Natalie.
And then finally, we discussed dancing as pan-Indigenous futurities. And pan-Indigenous practices are ongoing methods for survival for Indigenous people, which tangents teaching evidences. And then we quote Robin Wall Kimmerer, who states that reciprocity is an investment in abundance for both the eater and the eaten. In some native languages, the term for plants translates to those who take care of us. And I think this is similar to the presentation earlier, in which embodying these more than human relatives creates this experience that helps to facilitate and strengthen those relationships. By highlighting the Three Sisters Garden and intertribal practice and the specificity of Benally's language, Rulon calls attention to the commonalities and generative differences among pan-Indigenous traditional and contemporary practices, which are again important for solidarity building.
And one more image from this April workshop. Here on the right, you're seeing Rulon and Natalie embodying the botanical growth patterns of a Three Sisters garden. And then on my left, you're seeing one possible design. The garden is not always designed in this format, although it does always use these 3 plants: corn, beans, and squash. And again, it's, I think, important to highlight that Natalie is describing the Three Sisters garden in Dene language.
So something else that the paper brings in at this point is this framework of interconnected individualism, which I developed in another article that focuses on Rulon's work. And in what interconnected individualism does is highlight the human to human and human to more than human relationships and interconnections that are happening, as well as the more than humans with each other. And so that's really what's happening with the Three Sisters Garden. And then the interconnected individualism exists in contrast to settler colonial value systems that prioritize individual gain and human dominance over more than human animals and nature.
And these ideas are reflected in scientific practice that we see here with primatologist Jane Goodall, who has explained how wildlife trafficking and its ubiquity has created disastrous conditions by bringing people and animals in closer contact, creating opportunities for viruses to jump from animals to humans, crossing the species barrier. Goodall notes that this proximity is particularly present in meat markets, the wet markets, end quote, there are no borders for a virus, end quote. as is being demonstrated so well in this current pandemic.
So in our conclusion, we highlight the interconnectedness of past, present, and future, which is a challenge to settler colonialism, because settler colonial stereotypes often attempt to relegate Indigenous peoples to the past or historic era. And that is a strategy that that makes it seem as if settler colonial violence is not ongoing, and that Native lands are not continually being occupied in the present, which is of course not true. And then nonlinear conceptions of time are also essential to dancing as healing and to dismantling settler colonialism.
So ultimately, we're arguing for dancing as a form of homecoming, not homemaking, that insists on the return of Indigenous lands. And here we're echoing the land back movement that states to truly dismantle white supremacy and systems of oppression, we have to go back to the roots, which for us is putting Indigenous lands back in Indigenous hands.
In our paper, which is, has a framing with Rouland's quotes and is also, creates this circular structure. And so we wanted to end with a quote by Rouland. Once you've taken in the scent of dancing in the rain, seeing those flowers blooming, the dew coming off, and that one time where the rain comes to the desert, the experiences of the senses, the smell, the taste, the touch, that is what makes you want to love the desert enough to not want to build a mall there. Otherwise, it's a theory. It's something that looks good on paper and you can march on it, but we have to be able to engage the pleasure centers, the senses of the body, and the pure of love. Love brings compassion. Compassion moves us to action. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what a wonderful conclusion, bringing in so many of the ideas that were circulated previous in our panel. Anyone who has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can raise your bodily hand or your Zoom hand to speak up. And I just wanted to note this two dual themes that I saw running really interestingly throughout these. One, to borrow your phrase, Tria, this interconnected individualism, which I think really showed up in everybody's presentations, and this idea that Dara said of the reorganization of structure. So the way that this experience of the pandemic has reoriented us both towards the self and towards the connected self, I guess, and the role that that individual plays, whether it's in interactive media or in relationship to the environment. And similarly, then this idea of cyclicalness, right, or multiple times, different outs, different narratives. Also, unfortunately, you'll all have to wait to see the journal version, but the group's questions are also rhizomatic in the way that they propose them. So they are similarly not linear. The connections between the questions as they've written them are multi-topical and connected. So I don't know if me bringing those themes up highlights anything for you all that you want to add to the conversation, just thinking about the connection between structures and what this moment has maybe enabled or provoked for that.
I could maybe respond, Alex. I'm not sure if this is what you intended, but maybe just to circle back again, this notion of cyclical time, and just really appreciating every presentation here today. And thinking back on, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Calum? Yes. this notion of defining genre and the kind of categorization, thinking here of screen dance to screen dance, and then Tria and I are trying to really expand this in a very capacious way. What do you think is this kind of grappling with definition or categories? Like, who do you think that serves? Like, why do you think this tends to come up often under conversations of screen dance? I'm just curious.
I think for me, it's about being able to name something. I think we always grapple with that as humans. We like to speak with words. I think we would love to be able to dance our feelings, and I often do, but it doesn't often get me very far with people that perhaps aren't dancers. So I think this kind of this kind of multiplicity of what screen dance can be, or isn't, or is, or and all of the kind of in between things that happen is human nature in terms of trying to figure out what we're saying to each other. I don't know if that's answered your question, but I hope it might have gone some way too.
Would anyone from the larger group like to answer Kate's provocation about how you're thinking expansively in posing your questions?
I can give it a go. I think that it was really important for all of us not to define screen dance, and also not to define different experiences of the pandemic, to recognize that there are very distinct differences happening from region to region, and certainly among different populations who face different accessibility, economic challenges, etc. And even though all of us are currently based in Europe, we recognize that the situation was very different for each one of us. Some of us living under lockdown, some of us having curfews. There were just a broad range of experiences. And one of the things that I find perhaps even a bit radical about our work together was the fact that we didn't even discuss what each one of our definitions of screen dance is. So to be honest, I couldn't tell you what Ariadne thinks screen dance is, or what Elisa or Katja or Marco think of screen dance, which is interesting because we didn't make assumptions about it, but we didn't really discuss it either. So we had this really broad approach. But I have found in my own personal teaching in screen dance that for some of the participants in our workshops, this has been really problematic. There are certain types who would really like to have a strong definition of screen dance to know if they are working within screen dance, and that comes up really regularly. And then there are others who seem to find a certain freedom in the flexibility of this definition, which for me is always expanding. It's one of the things that I find the richest about screen dance. I can recognize historically that at times having a definition can be helpful, a loose definition in terms of noticing certain patterns, tracing certain histories, but at the same time that those definitions should never become a confinement for the art form or for any other practice that we engage with, and that we of course have to leave room for this flexibility, for development, for newer ideas to come in and change. I think it was Virginia Woolf who said, a body that changes is a body that keeps on living. And I would like to think of that for many things, whether it's land, a culture, an art practice. I don't know if anyone else from our group wants to speak about this experience of definitions.
Maybe me personally about the definition of screen dance. In a way, I was reading through the chat and somebody talked about the pandemic turn. And in a way, it is as if through the pandemic, all of this definition just went through the roof. So we have to find a new definition. And that's maybe why also we didn't talk about what we think screen dance is now, because it is in movement. Yeah.
Yeah, and also something, I mean, we're aware that we bombardized all of you with questions, but something that also that came up lately in our discussions was about the pandemic gaze. And this idea of the pandemic gaze is actually the way that the pandemic and all the experience of the pandemic informs our way of seeing understanding and defining things in a new way, or in a way that was different before the pandemic.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. To be honest, I think definitions are so tricky because they keep changing, and they really change on where you're coming from and who you are and what your experiences are. You know, we've been trying to define what dance is and we can never get anywhere. So, I think I like that. So for me, doing this research was really interesting because so far my research has been on Fosse, and that nobody disputes. Sorry, my cat has decided that it's time that he's done. He needs attention, so he's going to keep coming up. And you know, nobody's would dispute that dance and musical is dance that's created for screen, for camera, or for screen, or whatever. And then I think that our sense of screen, we've embraced it so much during the pandemic, and we're so much more willing to accept what we see. So, you know, I would never bring a cat to a conference, and yet here he is. And so, and all of us are kind of cool with it. So I think that has also very much changed about, oh, hi, kitty cat, sorry. And then I have that reaction. And so, yeah, so I would never allow myself to react like this in another professional situation. So I think in looking at everything that's available now is in a sense overwhelming, but also I think it's great because then we can start to think about how many more options we have and what we can do on screen. And I mean, I can't wait to go and see some live dance, to be honest. And to not have my eyes be exhausted by Zoom. But then on the other hand, you know, we have been able to do this, and I think that's great. And it's allowed us to create dances in so many different ways. I think the budgeting has really changed about who can create this, that, you know, anybody can have a phone and just do what they want to do. Which is as opposed to what we thought of as screen dance before this, where you needed professional cameras and somebody to edit it. And, you know, we talked about music rights in the previous one. Now you post something on Instagram to a story, nothing gets flagged. So I think that those definitions it's so huge now. And I think that's great because it's providing a freedom and even this. So what I wrote this article was that when you live in a place like anywhere but New York or LA or Chicago, you know, you're always kind of like, oh, I wish I could take class, or I wish I could do this. But then I was also really annoyed, like, why do I still want to do this? Why do I care about what Americans think about me? Like, you know, oh, they reposted us, like, you know, silly things, but also that I would not be able to do this. I get to go to one conference a year because it's so expensive for me to get anywhere from here. I have to fly everywhere. So now I can participate. I've seen conferences, I've seen performances, which I don't have access to. So I think that it's opened up the world in a weird way, in a great way. And yes, it comes with a lot of problems in terms of colonialism, post-colonialism, different types of colonialism, you know, Western, you know, it's this term that's come out as global majority. It still means that, you know, you get to be it and the rest of us are global majority. So there are really interesting conversations to be had, but I'm loving the fact that we can just keep discussing these definitions and that I can do this. And I can be at home, which I also quite like. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and one thing that stood out to me in terms of the expansiveness of this possible definition is that, Sandhya, when you were working with screen dance with your kids, I really felt that you were emphasizing the processual nature rather than the product.
Yeah.
So maybe to close us out, would you like to say a little bit about that framing of the process of it as opposed to what the end product is?
I think what you said is true, definitely. And in working with adults, in working with myself, I'm always focusing myself on what is my dance output going to be? What am I going to showcase? how am I going to draw in the audience? But when I'm working with my children during the pandemic, we were home, it was really relaxed. And we really didn't have, I mean, I didn't even start out thinking that I was going to write a paper on it. So it was really about what are they learning? How are we interacting? What are their questions? How are they bringing back what they saw in India? How they're, I mean, they were born here and they grew up in the US. And, you know, the differences between just the climate, the people, going to school in India versus going to school here, all these different things, the nature, you know, how the plants are different, how a lot of philosophical approaches to everyday living is different. And the fact that they grappled with these two worlds. So bringing all of that in and allowing them to sort of experience this whole process of making and learning through the process was the key to the project. And it spanned over several months, so it wasn't really, you know, there was no time and place that was specific. That was the good part about all this. And I think that for me, the biggest takeaway with the pandemic has been a degree of slowdown. I'm still, you know, I work in corporate, and I'm still, you know, up for meetings, and I have to talk with people across different parts of the world. But I find that, you know, just like we are now allowing the cat, sometimes my children just pop in, they're like, "Mommy," and, you know, that's never been, it would be like horrible in a meeting with my boss, but now it's like perfectly acceptable. So I feel like this is almost, this whole year has been a process for everyone. We've just found so many new things, so many new ways of engaging. I mean, from India, we could see the Himalayas for the first time in 30 years from Punjab, which, you know, was just amazing with the lockdown. So many little things that we had just not thought was possible, we'd forgotten about, all became once again in our purview, something that we could talk about, something that we could discuss. So I feel like really for each one of us, it is a process.
Thank you so much. Tria, was there anything you wanted to add on this front before we wrap up?
Sure. I mean, I can pick up on a couple of different strands. I think this idea of the pandemic gaze is so interesting, particularly because I think, you know, for some people, they were kind of like awakening to some of these injustices, and for some people, they've long been aware of these injustices. And I think another thing that I really appreciate about you know, the work that Sandhya, is that how I say it? Sandhya is doing too, is thinking about underrepresented groups in dance studies, whether it's, you know, by race or by ability or by age. And I just think that there are a lot of possibilities out there when we start viewing things from a non-Eurocentric lens. So something I think is really interesting is there's a Lakota leader, Black Elk, who said that, you know, grown men can, I'm paraphrasing here, but grown men have a lot to learn from little children because their minds are pure, or their hearts are pure, and the Great Spirit shows them a lot of things. And they haven't been socialized in a society, so they see other possibilities. And I think, you know, I think some of the solutions to climate change and inequity are in these non-Eurocentric worldviews, and they're being evidenced in dance. And I think that's really exciting.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful summation. Let's give our wonderful panelists today a round of applause. Such a strong finish to this Wonderful symposium. I am going to give some closing remarks now, which I hope will help us think about some of the wonderful provocations that we've gotten over the last 2 weekends. So you probably know who I am by now, but hi, I'm Dr. Alexandra Harlig, your co-convener. And I'm coming to you from my apartment in Manhattan, which bears the name given by its historical and future stewards, the Lenape people. New York is also the home to the largest population of Indigenous peoples in the US. In a year where we have been particularly concerned with dancing at home, and as Tria and Kate theorized for us, a specific kind of homecoming. It is important to note the Lenape hosted their first Manhattan-based powwow since their violent expulsion in the 1700s, only 3 years ago. And I'm going to put some links in the chat for you to learn more about that and to link you to the land back and land tax movements, which have gained mainstream traction during the pandemic. Before I continue, we also want to stand in solidarity with the Asian American community and condemn the ideologies that fuel recent hate crimes here in the US. So a major theme of this symposium, as well as the entirety of this year, has been how well our existing understandings of screen dance, and indeed our world as a whole, hold up under the pressures and shifts of a heavily mediated and mediatized pandemic. The pandemic has laid bare and exacerbated, rather than created, existing economic, racial, and gender disparities. Similarly, though at much lower stakes, the intense and simultaneous turn to screen dance has revealed an accelerated extant dance politics, platforms, norms, and genres. In both cases, in some ways, what has changed the most during this time is our perspective. We have long danced at home. In the US context that I study, I'm thinking about rent parties, dancing in front of TVs to American Bandstand, Soul Train, and MTV, countless sleepover basement choreographies, house parties, and of course, a dancing film for YouTube, Vine, Instagram, Dub Smash, and TikTok, even before the pandemic. But as we've seen in the symposium, home is a different place now. We have also long danced with, via and through the screen, but the screen too may be a different place, as many of our participants have argued, and one we can perhaps imagine the other side of. In my dissertation, building off of Ken McAllister and Curie Miller's work on video games, I identified 5 major forces in internet-based popular screen dance, encapsulating both intended and potential impact of a work. The idea of a force accounts for the range of possible readings and outcomes a video enables, depending on the needs and literacies of both creators and viewers. And these 5 forces were instructional force, documentary force, presentational force, representational force, and promotional force, which encapsulates economically driven decisions, as well as the effects of self-promotion and advertising. In the early days of the pandemic, when I was going over these ideas to guest teach in Gabri Krista's screen dance class, it came to me very clearly that I was missing a hugely important force, one that should have been there all along, but that had been particularly evident in the early pandemic output, that of participatory force. This accounts for the desire to join in, create, and share, for the pull felt from videos, as well as the signals and mechanisms through which participation is encouraged. Different popular screen dance genres, as well as individual videos, have different proportions of forces. And over the pandemic, so has screen dance output as a whole. The forces I analyzed as most prevalent previous to the pandemic, that is promotional, presentational, and representational, faded to the back as instructional, documentary, and participatory forces moved to the fore, with all the free classes, festivals, dance challenges, and more that we have heard about over these last 2 weekends. But in a failing global economy, especially as an end pushed ever into the future, it became clear that this particular instantiation of the gift economy, if I may utilize Harmony's theorization, a new commons created through a shared precarity, where mutual indebtedness was not only to each other, but perhaps a gratitude for being alive at all, this participatory first mode of the early pandemic was not sustainable. And so over the past year, new funding schemes have emerged, with some well-known popular dance teacher choreographers like Ian Eastwood and Mr. Wiggles finally adopting audience patronage platform Patreon. Studios have begun teaching live under various payment models. Some companies are selling their filmed works online, and the subscription-based tutorials coming out of particularly Los Angeles in the last few years have really cemented their place. Dancers who were working for us for free have returned to paid performance positions, or like Catherine Dizenhoff, who created and ran the very popular Dancing Alone Together website and social media. And she ran that only based on donations until late 2020 when it ceased operations. People like her have accepted administrative positions as live performance has failed to return. But as Harmony notes, the gift and market economies are not mutually exclusive. So despite the need for money, we still see the proliferation of new dance challenges, continued free classes, and perhaps we are reaching a kind of equilibrium between the two modes. So these were actually the topics I thought I might discuss in a submission to the Where We Dance Now thematic issue. When I proposed this to Harmony, she countered with an offer to co-edit, which brings us to this moment. Archer Porter noted to me last weekend after presenting that it was nice to talk about these topics on a screen. And this is actually a long-standing feature of internet dance discourse, where objects of analysis and their criticism, text and paratext, circulate simultaneously and on the same platforms. And it's been a real pleasure to be connected here and to consider all of our varied experiences together. And I'm really excited to see what we can do with our new technological literacies and newfound perspectives. So thank you to Harmony for extending the offer to co-edit and co-convene, and for all their work done to make this happen. And to all of you for being active participants and interlocutors. We hope the connections made here will be fruitful. And finally, thanks to the IJSD board for carving out a space for screen dance studies. And you are all welcome to stay here right now as we join the board and consider what's next for the journal and for the field. Thank you so much.